Okay, let's move on and talk about silk. And you may remember learning about this in elementary school in science. Silk is made from the cocoon of the silkworm. The scientific name is Bombyx mori, but this was renamed silkworm and silk moth after the discovery that the fibers from it could be made into fabric. Now, silkworms are a very special kind of worm, and I'm giving you all this background and history so you will understand why these fibers are expensive. So, yes, this is the boring part, but just so you'll understand how these fibers are made. So, silkworms only eat leaves of the white mulberry tree. So, it's a very specific tree they have to have to survive and to perpetuate their life cycle. They lay their eggs on the mulberry leaves, and then the worms hatch after 14 days. So, it's a 14-day cycle. These trees thrive in warm, temperate, and subtropical regions of Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. Now, the history is very interesting. Silk has been produced for over 5,000 years and it originates from China. The Chinese folklore says that Empress Zi Lingsh, if I'm saying that right, the emperor's wife, would walk through her gardens, taking time to notice and admire every flower, petal, and leaf. So she was very into nature. She noticed that all of her mulberry tree leaves were being eaten and were full of holes. So she began to search for the what was doing it, and she found these cocoons. She took the cocoons under the shade of a tree to rest and look at them. And while sipping her tea, she accidentally dropped one of the cocoons into her drink. And when she went to pull the cocoon out of the tea, it started to unravel with a very fine, shimmering thread. So that's how she discovered that the cocoon was one long thread. So she quickly took the soft, shiny fibers to her palace and arranged for the threads to be woven into silk, which has become the most luxurious cloth in the history of the world. So this process was happening in nature. This silk cocoon was being made in nature, and then it was discovered that it could be made into cloth. So factories and the industry figured out a way to make this cycle happen indoors under controlled environment. So the worms are actually cultivated in the factory in the bamboo trays filled with mulberry leaves. So you can see there, these are just trays with a bunch of the mulberry leaves and the worms on top of it. And the result of this is thousands of cocoons being produced in a controlled environment inside these factories. The next thing that happens is the workers sort through the cocoons, and the silk is actually harvested by dropping the cocoons into hot water and then unraveling them. So the water helps with that procedure of getting the silk off the cocoons or unraveling it. And you can see this guy is holding here threads from several cocoons. He's doing this by hand. Okay, so he's pulling the thread to unravel it from the cocoon where then they can make it into cloth. It's also done by machine. So you can go on YouTube and find these videos that shows the whole process, and it's a very fast process. But these machines, you can see the threads here, the very fine threads where they have to feed the thread into the machine, and then it just unravels the thread and they make it into cloth. So there it is again. The threads are extremely thin. It's like a spider web. It's very thin and delicate. So it takes many strands to be spun together to make a single thread of silk. So this is the process. If you didn't know, that's where silk comes from. It comes from um, a cocoon that a worm made. And that's kind of weird when you think about it, but that's the process. So silk is superior because it's very comfortable, it's very strong, it's the strongest known natural fiber. It's warm in winter and cool in summer. It's resistant to moths and dust mites. So that is one quality it has over wools and cashmere, is that moths don't like it. And it's pretty easily cleaned. So I've got here in my pile of samples for you this Talbot's top, which is it's 100% silk, and you'll notice that when you start finding different silks, they're different textures. Even though they're all 100% silk, it could be satin, which is a very shiny texture, or it could be crepe, which is a very rough and bumpy texture. So you'll have to learn these by feel. But this one is it's very sheer, and the tag was still on it when I found that. I paid, I think, $3 for this, and it has a retail tag of $89.50. So you can see that 100% silk is expensive when it's new. That's why I left the tag on this. So you can feel that one. This is another Talbot's top that has a slightly different texture. It's a little bit thicker, and 100% pure silk, and it's lined. The lining is also silk, and you can feel that it's thin, but it's strong. So there's another example for you. This is the Chico's top that is the crepe texture, so it's very bumpy, and it has ridges in it. But this is 100% silk, so it can also come in this texture. So there's a lot of different textures to silk, just like with wool. It may be made with different processes, so that's something that you learn as you go. Now, this is not silk. It looks like silk. This is a Target brand, and it is, I think it's polyester. But you can feel the difference between this very cheaply made garment that is not silk but looks like it, and a silk 100% silk item. There's a difference in the way it feels, and that's what you want to understand when you are out shopping, is how to quickly feel the difference. You can't really see the difference because so many synthetic fabrics look the same as the more expensive fabrics. So a lot of it's about feel, and some of them will fool you. So again, always look at the tag to see what it's made of. You never want to guess. You always want to look at the label. Okay, so now we are going to move on to wool, and this is a much more familiar fabric for you guys, I'm sure, but there's so many different kinds that they do bring different prices. So are you still there? Are you still listening? Yes, I know this is boring. I found this picture when I was looking for pictures of sheep and just thought he was cute. So this is just to keep you awake. Okay, some wool facts. Sheep were domesticated 9,000 years ago. It's a long time. Earliest wool garments were made about 7,000 years ago. Australia is the leading producer of merino wool. The outer surface of wool fiber is made up of fatty acid proteins, and does not absorb liquid. Sheep's wool is fire resistant. And just in case you didn't know, the inside of a baseball has 370 yards of wool yarn wound up around a cork center. So there's actually wool inside of baseballs. So that's a little trivia for you. Also, some black sheep trivia. Sometimes a rare black sheep is born into a white flock, and this is just a result of a recessive gene. Two recessive genes get together, and this is what happens. Back in the Middle Ages, in the 18th and 19th century, black sheep were thought to be the work of the devil because, well, back then they were very superstitious anyway and didn't understand things. But, when a black sheep would pop up, they would think that was the devil's work. But black wool is not desirable as far as the textile industry because it cannot be dyed. So that's why the white is, you see white or gray sheep most of the time because that wool can be easily dyed into other colors. Okay, harvesting wool. And isn't this an interesting picture? This shows you how much wool comes off a sheep when they're shearing it, and just the volume that's on there. It's just inches thick, and he's just very dirty. This isn't really gray, he's just dirty. But that is a lot of wool to come off of one animal. So you can see the difference in like the cashmere goat doesn't have near this amount of wool, and that's why it's so much more expensive, is because there just isn't as much of it. Okay, greasy wool. This is the wool straight off a sheep, and I do have this to show you. This bag of wool I ordered from a farm that raises sheep, and it came to me like straight off the sheep, like with dirt, and it smelled really bad. Like I washed this. I wanted to have a sample of the greasy wool for you to feel, but it was just too dirty, and I washed it very thoroughly and let it dry in the sun. So it's been sanitized, but it definitely has a feel, a greasy feel to it, and that's because of the lanolin. Now, it's like a fatty material, and it has to be removed before it's processed into yarn. So that is one of the things that is involved in the processing of wool. Greasy wool is just what they call it. It's just the wool straight off the sheep. It also contains dead skin and vegetable matter from the environment, grass, dirt, whatever. I'm guessing, natural products from the sheep that make it stink. So it has to be processed. So the lanolin is a fatty, greasy, waxy substance. And I've got here a sample of this bag balm, it's a processed lanolin. It's really hard to find 100% pure lanolin, but it's used in other products. They extract it from the greasy wool, and it's used in cosmetics, skincare, baby products. It's very moisturizing, very good for your skin. So you'll see it in like diaper rash, diaper ointments. It's mostly in ointments. This product, Bag Balm, was developed up in Vermont by dairy farms, a dairy farmer that was constantly milking the cows and having really, really chapped hands. So that's, well, actually, it was for the cows. He would put it on their milk sack or their bag, and that's why this is called bag balm, is because it was developed for the milk sack of cows, and then people started using it on their hands and their skin and their body, and it's now a product for skincare. So you can go take a look at that and see what that is. I've got a sample for you. But back in the olden days, wool was processed on farms, at home when people were raising the sheep, and it was boiled. And the lanolin would rise to the top and was skimmed off. So this is actually, I got this from a video where people were, showing how this was done, and they actually boil it in pots, and then they let it sit overnight, and they just skim the lanolin. It's just like fat, it just is skimmed off the top. But today the process is done in factories by machinery. So that is not done by hand like in the olden days. They have modernized that process. So we're going to stop this video here, and we will pick up with different types of wool.